All right, you guys, welcome to this webinar. I am so excited you are here. We have people listening in from Facebook Live. Shout out to our Facebook Live folks, and also from our Zoom folks, and also from our Truth FM app. So you're going to kind of see me focus on different cameras a little bit. Just know I'm trying to stay engaged to the two video audiences, but we're so happy and excited you're here, and my prayer is that what we talk about and discuss today is going to be a very valuable tool for you to make your decision concerning the COVID vaccines, okay? So that's my hope, that's my prayer, and yeah, let's get started because we have 1 hour. And I think that we're going to utilize all of it. But I'm going to pray in just for a little bit. I know there are a lot of people that are listening in that are not Christians. So just for a minute here, we're just going to pray in. So Father, I just thank you for this time. I thank you for this platform. I thank you for what we're about to discuss now. I pray that you help each and every one of us to gain the clarity that we need to make the decisions that we need to make for ourselves and for our families. And we give you all the glory, and we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So the overall format for today, I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes, nothing more, hopefully, to go through a presentation with you. And this is just kind of like where I go over the basics. And this is where I think you get a good understanding, a better understanding of what the vaccines are about and what they have and what they don't have. And then we'll go over the clinical trial results, the summary, especially the stage 3 the phase 3 clinical trials. And then we'll just kind of do a comparison of the three. I'm focusing on the two mRNA vaccines that are available right now in the US. And then I'll touch on the DNA vaccine that's being worked on more in the UK with AstraZeneca and Oxford University. And that's the reason I pulled that in, is because we have some listeners that come in from the UK as well, and from countries where that vaccine is going to be more relevant. So just kind of keep an open mind, and let's just kind of look at the different landscapes and see what's going on. Q&A, questions and answers, will be after the presentation. So pardon me if I'm not able to address your question during the presentation. I feel like we'll have enough time to cover the presentations. Okay, so this presentation is going to kind of take some of you back to science class 101. So forgive me. Don't think of it as class. Think about it as conversation, really, because science is really can be very common sensey, and my goal here is to kind of keep it that way. So let's hope I'm successful in doing that. Okay. All right. So like I said, today's agenda for the presentation especially is looking at short introduction to vaccines. We're going to look at the Moderna and the Pfizer BioNtech vaccines. AstraZeneca is the DNA vaccine. And then just kind of give a little bit of an overview of other vaccines in the works. Definitely not everything, because there's a lot happening right now, right? So I'm just focusing on a select few. All right. So when we talk about vaccines, there are different types of vaccines, okay? And if I'm turning this way, that's because I'm also focusing on my Zoom presentation for those of you on Facebook Live. So there are different types of vaccines. Next slide, please. We have what we call the live attenuated vaccines. And these are essentially let's say I'm going to use COVID-19 as my example. So it's like getting the COVID virus and essentially weakening it. And so you can either use heat, you can use chemical treatment. There are just different standard processes that are used to essentially make the virus not as fatal or not as deadly, what we call not as virulent as it normally would be. Okay, so an example of this type of vaccine would be like the MMR vaccine, the flu vaccine. When you guys go to get the flu vaccine, for some of you that do, for example, is the ones that put through your nose. Okay, so that's a live attenuated vaccine. The other vaccine type that we have available, if my screen, okay, is the inactivated. This time now, we're not just weakening the vaccine, we're actually we're not just weakening the virus or the bacteria. In this case, we're actually killing it. Okay, and so we kill it and then we put it in the system, and the immune system thinks it has something and it will mount an immune response. Okay, examples are like the hepatitis A vaccine that we currently have, and the polio vaccines are also the inactivated types. Okay, and then we have what we call the recombinant vaccine. This is essentially taking, especially like a protein. In the case of COVID-19, for example, we have some vaccines that are based on taking, like you guys have seen that, what do you call it? You've seen the pictures of the virus and it has the spiky things on it, right? So imagine just taking the spiky part of the virus and then making that a vaccine. So when you introduce that into the body, your body will think it's seeing a virus, because your body is actually geared to respond to foreign things getting into your body. Right? And so it's going to mount an immune response. It's going to try to develop a strategy to fight that virus. But in this case, it's not the virus. Okay. So flu vaccine as well is another example. So the one that they inject in your hand, for example, is an example of a recombinant protein type vaccine. Okay. And then there's vaccines that are based on toxins. So they're actually bacteria or just what you call micropathogens out there that they themselves don't actually cause you harm. It's the toxin that they release that makes us sick. Okay, so tetanus, for example, is an example of that. So in that case, we the vaccines for those are based on the toxin itself, like using the toxin, of course, deactivating the toxin because we don't want to get the toxin, and then giving that to our system, and our system will develop an immune response based on that toxin. Okay? All right. So now I'm about to shift gear to talk more about the COVID-19 vaccines, but I do want to kind of point to certain things on here. So don't, again, if you're like, I don't like science, let's pretend this is not. No, we can't do that. But what I'm saying is just pay attention and stay with me here, because all I want to highlight on this diagram for those of you on Facebook, you're just seeing that now. All I want to highlight here is pay attention to where it says the nucleus, that yellow ring. Okay, so you have the yellow ring, and then you have the green rectangular border. That's what we call the plasma membrane. Okay, so that's what this. You're looking at a single cell, a single what you call eukaryotic cell. This is like a cell in your body. Okay, so DNA belongs in the nucleus. This is where DNA is. And this is going to be important in terms of understanding and busting some of the myths that you've heard about some of these vaccines being able to change your DNA, etc. Right? mRNA hangs out in the cytosol, or what you call cytoplasm. So this is every other part in the cell that's not part of the nucleus. Okay, so this is very important. So the mRNA vaccines that are available in the US right now are not able to get into your nucleus. They're not able to access where your DNA is hanging out. Okay, so this nucleus area is kind of like the VIP. Like you need extra something to be able to access this part of the cell. You can't just roll up to the nucleus and kind of expect to get in, right? It's highly regulated. And the reason for that, right, is it's the blueprint of your life. It's the blueprint of a cell. A cell only knows how to be like your heart cells or like your liver cells. They only know how to be liver cells or do what liver is supposed to do and what a heart is supposed to do based on the blueprint that's in this DNA. So it is very important that it is protected. Okay, and so not everything goes in here, but DNA can go in here. So the DNA vaccines that we're going to talk about, they can go in here. The mRNA vaccines cannot get in here. They can only go here. Okay. And what the mRNA vaccines are, for those of you that are maybe like in the contract, in like if you're like a builder, right? There's the blueprint. You don't walk around everywhere with your blueprint, because if anything happens and you destroy it, it's gone. What you do is make a copy of the blueprint, And that's what you use. You spill coffee on that thing, you can do whatever. You can always make another copy, right? It's not the end of the world. That's what mRNAs do for our cells. They're the copy that goes out into the cytoplasm, and then that's what the proteins are made of. So it's kind of like the template for the proteins to be produced. Okay? So that's a little science 101 there. So mRNA vaccines, let's go into mRNA vaccines. Why now? A lot of people are like, how come it's just coming up now? Like, part of the fear or some of the things that I've heard. And again, before I even go into that, it's okay to have questions. I had questions. I think it's a very healthy thing for us to go through life just being very informed and critical consumers, but critical in a good way, right? It's critical doesn't necessarily mean negative. It just means you're thinking about what you're consuming. And so that's what this is about. But like I said in some of my posts, what I didn't expect is the amount of just blatantly false information that's circulating out there. And so one of the things we'll get to talk about is how do you actually when an information comes to you, how do you vet it, right? Because now there's so much stuff out there. It's almost like we're so overwhelmed that we don't know what to believe. But it can be very simple to tease out what's true and what's not, especially when you're looking at stuff like this. But mRNA vaccines didn't just kind of show up because COVID happened. This system has been investigated and has been in the works for the past more than 30 years now. Okay. And one of the drawbacks has been because it is not very stable. So if we were to go back to that picture that I showed you, the cell where the mRNA is in the cytoplasm, it doesn't stay there forever. There are enzymes that are in the cytoplasm that actually chew it up and destroy it. Because, for example, if you're eating a protein meal and you need enzymes to break down the protein, you don't need the protein forever. You just need it for the time that you need it to break down what you just ate. And so your system, your body has processes in place where it's able to regulate how much of a protein it needs. If it needs a lot of it, it's going to make a lot. If it needs not so much of it, then it will not make so much of it. And one of the ways that it controls that is the mRNA that it allows to exist. So you have enzymes that break down mRNA so they don't last in your system for a long time. So that means mRNA is not stable. And one of the challenges that the research folks had was how to make it more stable so that it can be a more viable vaccine option, okay, instead of making the protein. And the other thing that makes this system very appealing is that with the protein, you know how I went through the list of all the different types of vaccines, like the killed germ, the attenuated, the weakened ones, those take longer. Right? Because you have to grow the virus or the bacteria, for example. You have to make the protein. And making protein is very challenging when you're making the recombinant proteins outside of the original cells, or because you're making the protein outside of the virus or the protein or the bacteria, sorry. And so what happens is those systems take longer. So if we were ever to respond to something quickly, those systems don't quite give us the tools necessary. And that's why you haven't seen any of those approved yet, right? So far we have the mRNA vaccines, but none of the other types have been approved here. Some of them are just now going into phase 3 clinical trials, right? So that's one. The other thing too is this mRNA vaccine platform has been heavily studied and actually is an upgrade in the way I look at it from what we have, because not only are we able to use it for vaccine purposes, this is being explored for treating cancer and many other challenges that we tend to experience in the health space. And so when I read more and kind of got a better understanding going through literature and just looking at what's known, what we know, what we don't know, I was super juiced. I'm like, this is an upgrade. This is actually really good. Okay, the only reason why we were able to respond to COVID in the way that we have with the vaccine and be able to produce it as fast as we have is because the system lends itself to a faster process compared to going back to trying to make the protein. Okay. And then the other thing is actually, we told that for later. Advantages. Okay. It's not infectious. So that's busting a myth out there that's saying that getting these vaccines actually gives you COVID. That's a lie. That's false. That's not true. Again, remember that mRNA vaccine never makes it into your DNA. It stays in the cytoplasm, and the protein that's necessary for your immune reaction, for example, like, so the mRNA for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, they're based on that spike protein. So that spiky thing on the virus is very key. It's one of the most effective triggers for your immune system when it sees that, because those spiky things are needed to get into your cell. Okay, and the mRNA vaccine essentially is the mRNA that makes the spike protein. Okay, so then it makes that spike protein, and then it kind of reports. There's this system, and I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to, again, make this too sciencey, but when it makes that protein, it presents it. It kind of shows up, like outside the cell, and that's how your immune system are able to get the 411 of what's happening inside your cell. Is that the cells tell on themselves. They're like, hey, this is what's happening in here. Just FYI for all of you patrol immune cells that are going around and trying to make sure everything is working the way they should. Okay. And when your immune system sees something that it doesn't recognize, then it goes into action. That's the whole gist around it. So the mRNA that's in the Moderna and in the Pfizer are based on what will make that spike protein. Okay. So with mRNAs, we don't have any risk of mutations. We're hearing a lot about the new variant, for example, of COVID-19 that's kind of making its headway in the news and in different parts of the world. That's because DNA can mutate. mRNA, not quite, at least not that we know of. Okay. It's degraded by normal cellular process, like I already told you guys, and it's very rapid and inexpensive to produce, and that's something that's very necessary when you're responding to an emergency like we're in. The challenges with this is still storage. So we're going to talk about this later, where you see that these mRNA vaccines, you need to store them in like some ridiculously cold environment, right? And the reason for that is because they're not as stable as, say, DNA, where you can pop it in the fridge and it won't break down and deteriorate over a short period of time. Okay, so we'll talk more about that. So now this is a slide going into the next page. This is a slide from Moderna itself, and I thought it was really cool, a way to kind of show you how the vaccines are working. Now, this is just the general one, right? So this is showing not just how the Moderna vaccine works, but also the Pfizer. So this is kind of like a general platform. So you have the mRNA, right? That's right there in the middle of that round thing. Okay, that round thing is what we call a nanolipid. They represent, or they're kind of like a different, they're related to your plasma membrane, and your plasma membrane are the encasing for your cells. Okay, so you have those micro or the nanolipids, and inside it you have your mRNA. The mRNA, the blue part of the mRNA, is the part that codes for the spike protein. It's the part that makes the spike protein, and then on the flanking regions of it are essentially necessary for you to be able to make that spike protein. So this is not luciferase. There's no luciferase, which is, I don't know where that came from, but there's no luciferase. There's nothing else that's in the mRNA sequence. It's just a spike protein, and then you have the flanking regions at the front and the back, and those are there to help make the protein in the middle. Okay, so when you inject that into the muscle, it goes into your cell. Again, if you look below there, you see where it says nucleus. You can notice that this mRNA vaccine doesn't have any contact with your nucleus, which is where your DNA is. So there is no opportunity for it to insert itself into your DNA, like some people have put out there, right? That, oh, it goes in and changes your DNA. It's not able to do that. Okay. And so you have what you call ribosomes. These are the things that make proteins from mRNA. So in this case, it will go ahead and make that spike protein. And that spike protein, as you can see here, it's taken outside the cell. and this is what your immune system responds to. Those viral antigens, that's what your immune system responds to. Okay, and in this case, it would be the spike protein. Now your immune system is riled up and it's like, let's do this, right? The way your immune system works though is the first time around, it shows up and it's just ready to just, it has a very broad, non-specific approach, right? It's kind of like coming in, what's the thing called? Oh, I don't know who I'm asking because I can't hear anyone. But you know how like in movies, I'm really bad with like names and stuff, whatever. They sort of throw the thing that's like a ball and it releases some kind of toxic thing and everyone's coughing and you kind of run away. Okay. So think about that as the first layer of your immune response. That's like horrible. Why I don't know why I'm blanking out on the name. But you put that in there, everybody, the gas, tear gas. Oh yes. See, like, yeah, I didn't. Shout out to my husband in the behind the scene, making me look great. So, but it comes in, right? In that space, the good guys and the bad guys are going to be affected equally by tear gas. So the inflammation, you know how like some people like myself, I took the vaccine, I got the first dose for Moderna already. And one of the things I experienced was like the soreness, right? And it's inflammation. And that's that general response. And so your good cells are feeling, everything is feeling it. But going into like a week or so after that initial response, you get these more specific responses. And that's the key to the prolonged immunity that you and I get to experience when it works. Okay. And so, but it's all based on these viral antigens. Okay. All right. So now let's go into Moderna vaccine, to the next slide. So first dose, you get the first dose, 28 days later, you get the second dose. And then, 28 days later, you get the second dose. But actually what I'm showing you on this slide is how the phase 3 trials were done. So bear with me for a minute. So the phase 3 trials, they got people, gave them first dose, 28 days later, give them the second dose. And then 14 days later, they were tested for COVID. But in this case, they didn't just test everyone for COVID. They only tested people who were showing symptoms of what might be COVID. Okay. So for this particular clinical trial, there were about 30,000 people that were participating. You can go ahead and show that, the next. Sorry guys, I'm trying to make sure I'm carrying all the different platforms along. But there were about 30,000 participants that were involved in the phase 3 trials. This is huge. Okay, this is absolutely encouraging. And a lot of the conversations I have with people, for example, around so-and-so person, you guys heard of that movie Plandemic, or it went viral for a minute and then I think it was censored. A friend of mine has sent it to me and wanted me to watch it. And I'm like, I will watch it because I will watch it and I'll keep an open mind. And one thing I was doing was there were studies that were being quoted and referenced and all that stuff. And I was just writing them down. And then I went to go look at the studies myself. Some of these studies had 50 people. You cannot make any reference to anything and make it general based on 50 people. That's not a representation of even a small town, let alone now you're talking about a whole nation or like the whole world. So it's important that when people are quoting, they did this study. Every study is not a good study, or every study is not adequate enough to be referenced to prove a particular point. Okay. So 30,000 participants for this study is pretty amazing and very necessary. Again, remember, everything was happening so fast. What they do with these studies, for example, is they divide the 30,000 into two groups. There's the placebo group, which is the group that doesn't get the vaccine, but they don't know, or at least they're not supposed to know that they got the vaccine. Some people this one was a little different. Some people were like, I kind of suspect that I didn't get the vaccine because I didn't feel any kind of pain or anything. I just, but You're not supposed to know. The people that are doing the study are not supposed to know. So it's called a double-blinded study, because then we want to eliminate bias. You'd be interested in what we do as humans in general. It's just a natural part of who we are when we begin to act based on what we know. So it's very important that these are double-blinded, okay? And they enrolled people that are 18 years and above. Okay, and this is very standard in the drug discovery or vaccine discovery world, again, because when you're talking about vulnerable groups, which are children, pregnant women, lactating women, or people who have immunocompromised situations for different health reasons, we don't want to include them in the study, because again, this is the study. Okay, in the placebo group, there were 185 COVID positive patients. That's after that 14 days, when the 14 days they ran the test, right? And out of 15,000 or so people, 185 people tested positive 14 days later. And 30 of those people experienced severe disease, okay? And then the other half that actually got the actual COVID vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, only 11 people tested positive for COVID after 14 days. And there were no severe disease. Now, this is very encouraging. This is telling you, based on, if you plug in the numbers, the efficacy for this vaccine is 94.5% against just getting COVID, symptomatic COVID. And then it's 100% effective against getting severe COVID, like having to need hospitalization. That's very, very, very encouraging. Okay, and the studies, the source, I listed the sources there on the screen. These data are available for the public on the FDA website, for example. The documentation, it's like 53 pages for each of these, thereabout, or 50-something pages. It essentially provides what like Moderna submitted to the FDA, the summary of what they submitted. It has all the details of the studies, the participants, the different adverse reactions, etc. Okay, so that you can also take a look at it if you are able to, if you want to, right? It's available. So it's not hidden, it's not a secret. Okay? All right, so I'm gonna move faster because I think I'm going a little. All right, so the next slide is talking about some of the local, what you call the local adverse reactions, and that's essentially like what happened in the site of injection where the vaccine was given. Of course, a lot of people, right, 80 something percent of the people in the treatment group, they experienced pain. I experienced it when I took the first dose, right? My hand was kind of sore for like at least 4 to 5, 6 hours, right? And I just kind of would massage it or just kind of try to shake it off a little bit, but that was there. There was swollen lymph nodes that were reported, and so lymph nodes are essentially a part of your immune system, and that's kind of like where immune cells hang out, right? Think about it like police stations or something. If you have like multiple different police stations that hang out in different cities, and they're there to kind of make sure things in their area are doing good. That's what those lymph nodes are. So it makes, and when they are activated, when it's a little bit more busy than it normally should be, you would expect, it's not uncommon that you see, experience some kind of swollenness. And so like you also maybe experience this, like if you have a cold or something, like you might experience that some of your lymph nodes, they feel like balls, like little balls. So that's what that is. And then there was redness and there was swelling. That way also experienced. Now, and then there were more systemic adverse reactions. Some of you, when you hear the word adverse, it might be like, oh my gosh, that's just crazy. But if you look at this list, adverse reaction is just really any reaction that you got that wasn't the primary intention. The primary intention of the vaccines was not for you to feel pain. It wasn't for you to feel, have swollen lymph nodes. So all of those things have to be reported. So in the systemic adverse reactions, you can see here, you have fatigue. Okay, a lot of people, 37 to 65% of people in the treatment group, for example, experience fatigue, headache, muscle pain, joint pain, fever. And I'm showing the percentage there just to give you an idea of what fraction of people that got the vaccine experienced these. Okay, nausea, vomiting, chills was the lowest that was reported there. So these, again, when you think about it, it's a sign that the immune system is responding. A lot of when we go through disease and sickness, actually a lot of the discomforts that you and I feel is because of what our immune system is doing. A lot of times, because when your immune system is responding, especially when it's inflammation is really your immune system raising the temperature of things. And like when we talk about fever, for example, right, that's kind of like your immune system turning things up so that it can make the environment miserable for that foreign intruder. But the bad news is all your other cells don't like hot stuff either. So you end up feeling the grunt of what your immune system is doing. And that's the same thing with like the inflammation, the headache, all of that stuff are kind of like these are not abnormal. That's really all what I'm trying to say. And I know there were questions, or there are some reports there about Bell palsy. Just because something showed up, for example, Bell's palsy, if someone got Bell's palsy in the treatment group, that's not necessarily a red sign. You're also going to check for whether the rate at which you're seeing Bell palsy, whether it correlates with the rate that Bell palsy normally occurs in the general public, right? So if the rate of Bell palsy occurrence in the general public is like 1%, and you're seeing a rate of 1% or lower in your group, that's not, it's in line with what's expected. Where there's a problem is if you're showing that 10% of your people are getting Bell's palsy and the rate in the general, under normal circumstances, should be 1%. That's when that's a problem. But still, it's supposed to be reported, and every one of them were reported for the mRNA vaccines. Okay, so now moving on to Pfizer. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, first dose, what's my time? Oh my gosh, I am so behind. Okay, first dose, then 21 days later, they gave the participants the second dose, and then 7 days after that, they did a COVID test on participants with symptoms. Okay, and this study, there were about 43,000 participants, 16 years and above. Okay, the placebo group, there was only 162 COVID positive participants, and 9 of those experienced severe disease. And in the treatment group, there were only 8 COVID-19 positives, okay, with 1 severe disease. So what this means, there's a 95% efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine against getting symptomatic COVID, and there's an 87.5 efficacy against getting severe COVID disease. Okay. All right. So now let's look at the adverse reactions for the Pfizer BioNTech, and you can see here it's not that much different from what we saw with Moderna, right? There's the pain, the redness, the swelling, and the systemic adverse reactions. Same thing: fatigue, headache, etc. Diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, but I kind of listed them in a way that shows you the most common ones are at top, and then the less common ones are further down the list. Okay. All right. So now quickly, AstraZeneca, the Oxford vaccine. So this one it's not in the market yet, and this is being explored. This again, Oxford University is in the UK. The cell, the system, the picture of the cell I showed you, the DNA vaccine goes into your nucleus. Okay. And based on the data that AstraZeneca, for example, has presented, they have shown that it doesn't get intertwined into your DNA. Okay. But it does go into your nucleus. Okay. But their first dose, they gave the first dose, and then 14 days later they gave COVID test for all the participants. So not just people who were showing symptoms. They gave, they did the test for all participants. So this phase 3 clinical trial is still ongoing, which is why I didn't really focus a lot on it. Okay. So far at the time that the data that I saw was released, they had about 12,000 participants. Okay. And the nature of these clinical trials is they do it in multiple different locations. Again, because for a global pandemic like this, you kind of want to make sure that you're getting a representative sample. So going into different parts of the world, for example, and getting these tests done. So one site was in Brazil and the other was in UK. And there were some things that occurred that led to different results between the two groups. And I'm not going to go into that for the sake of time, but it was essentially with the dosing. Okay. So what ended up happening was that the UK group got was it the UK group? One of the groups, I don't want to make any specifics. One of the groups got an efficacy of 62%. And then the other group got an efficacy of 92% or 90 something, 94% or thereabout. And the difference was just because of the dosing. Someone in the UK group, no. See, my brain is messing with me. I don't know which group did which, but there was a slight modification to the number, the amount of dosage that was supposed to be given that ended up yielding a better result. So it was kind of like they stumbled on it kind of thing, or it gave a better result. But what that meant, again, when you're doing research, you have to represent all the data, whether good or bad or ugly, right? So the efficacy as of now is 70%, but that's because they had to take an average of the 62% efficacy and the 90-something% efficacy and come in the middle. So the study is still ongoing, but so far it's showing that the treatment group have shown less COVID-19 positive tests, and the good thing too is the no COVID-19 hospitalizations. Okay. So I'm going to move on from the AstraZeneca Oxford. They are making some changes, making some corrections, figuring out what actually happened to lead to those two different types of data. And then we'll see the full results once they have it available. Other COVID-19 vaccines in the works. China, for example, has CoronaVac. It's an inactivated virus. So remember her saying like you can get the virus itself and kill the virus and then give that. Okay. It's in phase 3 trials. Johnson & Johnson has DNA, a DNA-based virus similar to like the AstraZeneca Oxford one that's currently in the works, and it's also in the phase 3 trials. I put the adeno, if you look there, you see the adenovirus vector. I've seen, one of the questions I've gotten is, what's this thing I'm hearing about people being more, having a higher propensity of getting HIV/AIDS when they get these vaccines? That's kind of like where that was coming from. So the adenovirus vector is essentially an adenovirus that by itself doesn't cause any harm to our body. And there are different types of adenovirus. And one of the things with this DNA and RNA vaccines is you can't just inject the DNA or the RNA into the body. It will just get demolished. Like your immune system totally have their game all the way up when it comes to responding to naked DNA and naked RNA, what we call naked, meaning no encasing. They're just out there, just kind of hanging out. Like, who do you think you are? We're going to get rid of you. That's what your immune system is doing. And so for these mRNAs to be, or the mRNA or the DNA to be delivered efficiently into your body, it needs to kind of have a transporter. And so like the Moderna vaccine, I showed you guys that nanoparticle, the nanolipid that's surrounding it, that's kind of like the thing that protects the mRNA from being degraded before it even gets into your cell. Okay. And the same with the DNA. In this case, Johnson & Johnson is using adenovirus. Well, there was another research group who had worked with adenovirus, a different type, a different variation, but still in the same family. And they had tried to use it to do, for vaccine or research purpose, a vaccine, I think. it's a vaccine purpose. I don't remember which particular vaccine, but it was like maybe about 10 years ago or so. And they noted in their data that people who got the vaccine in their trials seem to have a higher propensity of getting the HIV/AIDS. And so that study was stopped. And I can't go into the details of how that's connected, because that's like going into into more depth that's necessary. But that was the observation, and they reported it. And when the adenovirus kind of came back into our conversations around the COVID-19 vaccine, they wrote a concern. They expressed their concern that this was what they discovered when they try to work with this virus, with the vector. So it needs to be definitely looked at and looked into. Okay, so that concern is not applicable to all COVID vaccines. It's especially as it relates to the platforms that are using the adenovirus vector as their way of getting the virus in the DNA or mRNA into the body. Okay, there are several other vaccines that are in the works. There's Novavax, I think it's called, that's currently made it in the news a couple of days ago. They just got the go-ahead for the phase 3 trials. That's a recombinant protein based, I think. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry about that. I think it's a recombinant protein based system. So again, that's where you're taking a protein. In this case, they were using the spike protein. The spike protein is like the hot thing when it comes to your immune system and what it recognizes. And so there are multiple others in the works, okay? And one of the things, again, if you kind of go into how come everything moved so fast? Everything moves so fast. How come we already have a vaccine? Typically it takes 8 to 9 years to get a vaccine approved. Well, there are multiple reasons for that. One of them being, no, not yet, babe, sorry. One of them being that there was lots of money and lots of attention and resources that was given to this pandemic. Okay, you'd be surprised what happens when you have the right amount of human resource and the right amount of money. We can find a cure for anything we want. A lot of times the bottleneck is in the resource that's available, and everyone essentially dropped everything and faced COVID. Okay, the other thing, like I told you, more than 30 years of research. So it's not like everything that you're seeing just kind of was cooked up in the lab somewhere last night and now we're shipping it out. This is based on 30 years, more than 30 years of research already. And the other thing that made this process much faster is because typically the way FDA works when they're reviewing data to approve or decline, there are lots of things that don't make it into the light of day, okay, in terms of, so it's not like everything makes it through the FDA. In the US, we have one of the most strictest, most independent review process when it comes to getting approval for drugs and vaccines. It's really, really, the standards are very high. But instead of, typically the process is you submit everything and then they review it. Well, because of the urgency of COVID, they were reviewing materials submitted by, say, Moderna and Pfizer as they were coming in. So then that way, they're not waiting for everything to come in and then review all at once. So that was one of the main things that made the process a lot faster. So this is kind of like in summary, the summary of all the different, the 3 specific ones that I covered today, okay? So the mRNA vaccines are the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, okay? And there it shows you the efficacy. It shows you the storage, which I was referring to earlier. So 4 degrees Fahrenheit is what you need for storage for Moderna. Think about freezer, okay? Negative 94 degrees Fahrenheit storage for the Pfizer vaccine. That's ridiculously cold, okay? This is what kind of makes these, again, remember I talked about mRNA not being as stable. You need to keep them in this really cold environment for them to stay stable. So that's one of the challenges with the mRNA vaccines. If you go to a country that don't have the ability to afford what's necessary to store them at these cold temperatures, it's not going to be very practical. Yes, it works, but it's not going to be practical to get it around. Okay, and that's what makes the DNA vaccines or the protein vaccines a bit more appealing, because look here, the DNA vaccine, you can store it at 36 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. You pop it in that, you pop that bad boy in the fridge, pop it in a cold environment, and it will be fine. It's more stable. That's more practical when you're looking at countries that are not able to afford the freezer, the really cold environments for the mRNA vaccines. In terms of the adverse reactions, again, most of what was seen were mild adverse reactions. I would definitely rather take these mild reactions compared to getting COVID, for example, right? Because that thing is misery. It's not fun. It's not something that you want to have to deal with. Trust me. And I know there's a lot of fake news. I had to debunk one today saying it was fake. It's not real. It's the flu. No. You know, one thing about science is science doesn't care about your opinion. It doesn't care about my opinion. We've tried many opinions to try to wish COVID away, and it's still here. Okay. So unfortunately, we're in a climate that we're in, and we're all entitled to our opinions. But please understand that when you're dealing with a scientific space, none of that matters, because science will do what it do. Okay, it will do what it wants to do. Sorry, I just had to kind of make that point a little clearer. No fatalities due to the vaccines. Okay, there were deaths that happened during the vaccine, the clinical trials, but it was not due to the vaccines. Some of those deaths were in the placebo group, which is the people, or most actually, for one of them, it was like the deaths were in the placebo group. Again, life happens. We have babies and we die. It's the, you know, the flux of life, right? And so if you're doing if you're doing a trial that you have X number of people and one of them dies just because, yeah, people are dying in the world every day. So it doesn't mean that the vaccine led to their death. And they do study these things to make sure. So it's not like they're like, oh yeah, that person died, it's not the vaccine. No. So the deaths that were observed, and I think there were like 2 or 3, were due to natural causes that had nothing to do with the vaccines. Okay, so no fatalities due to the vaccines were seen. And then the other thing here is the cost of each vaccine. But most of us here in the US, for example, if you have insurance, and I think even if you don't have insurance, I'm not sure the extent to which the government paid for everything to be taken care of. The whole goal is that very little should be coming out of pocket. Okay, and the DNA vaccine, you can see here, is considerably cheaper, $2 to $3. Most of it is, again, due to the logistics of getting it from point A to B. It's going to be less expensive to transport compared to the other vaccines. Okay, and I will end my sharing with pictures of amazing, wonderful people that I know that have gotten this vaccine so far. This is a lot of these people here are people from the medical school at Davis, where I'm currently attending, and it's been a blessing. This is a blessing, and I'm so glad that we have these solutions available. But again, it's a choice for you to make. But I pray and I hope that your choice is based on facts and not on lies and false information that's available out there. Because for some reason there are just different groups and for different reasons that are just bent on just putting information out there, blatantly lying about stuff, or either out of pride they're speaking into stuff they don't quite understand. We don't need to have an opinion about everything, especially if it's an area you don't quite understand. There's a lot of humility that's necessary to adopt that kind of posture. And so I think it's very important that we kind of tread very carefully and humbly in this season, and ask yourself the sources that you reference or that are informing your fears and feeding the fears. What's their intention? What's their source? What's their credibility? All those things are very important. And so now we're going to go into Q&A.